Hello, everyone. This is the second segment of the first lesson in Pre-Socratic to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. Today, we are talking about Thales from Miletus, who is presumably the first philosopher in the Western tradition. Now, as you may imagine, such designations are contentious. Who defines what a philosopher is? Who defines who really should count as the first philosopher? What is the difference between speculations about the natural world, science, philosophy, even poetry? None of these delineations that maybe nowadays we think are pretty clear cut exist at the time. Many of the early Greek philosophers actually write in poetic form because that is the most highly regarded format for writing. So if you want to say something important, you're going to say it in poetry. But that, of course, means that all the kind of lines that nowadays seem pretty clear cut, this is literature, this is philosophy, this is science, none of these distinctions are clear at the time. So it's a pretty contentious thing to say that someone is the first philosopher. But one of the things for which Thales is famous is very remarkable. Namely, he was the first scientist in the Western tradition to predict an eclipse of the sun. That was in 585. And that is a big deal, and it made him famous. Now, let's say that is the kind of thing that nowadays we would call natural science or physics or cosmology. He's also famous for something that counts, at least in retrospect, as a contribution to philosophy. And that is the claim that whatever this means now, everything is out of order. And I want us to focus on just this claim to some extent for methodological reasons, because I want us to realize how difficult it is to engage with material and ideas that are chronologically so far removed from us, more than 2,000 years removed from us, that it really takes a lot of work to think one's way into it and to also consider different options for what it is that someone could have been saying. Now, one of the main sources for pre-Socratic philosophy, early Greek philosophy, is Aristotle. And Aristotle, of course, is a philosopher in his own right. So Aristotle is not a historian of philosophy. Aristotle is not writing in order to report to us what someone else was saying. Rather, Aristotle is developing his own views by asking, here's my question. What is it that my predecessors have thought about this question? That is a quite successful method in philosophy, that if you have a question, you don't immediately say, well, here's my answer, but you say, what is it that others have been thinking about this? Then maybe you get ideas for what it is that you think they got right and what is it you think they did not get right. And that is a way to develop your own position. So this is roughly one of Aristotle's methods and one of Aristotle's most prominent questions. One of the questions that he thinks really are at the heart of philosophy is the question, and that's a quite technical formulation: what are the first principles? The Greek term for principle is arché, and it is a complicated term, in particular in the way Aristotle is using it, because it can mean a bunch of things. It can mean, on the one hand, something kind of physical, something like the beginning or origin or source or cause in the world out of which things have developed. But it can also mean something like theory or axiom or explanation. So, and that is not a physical thing, that is like a theoretical item. And it is one of the biggest difficulties in interpreting Aristotle that he likes to talk about, so and so says that the principle, the arché, is such and such. And then you have to ask yourself, is he making or reporting a claim about the physical world? Or is he reporting a claim about someone's theorem or axiom? And both is kind of part of the picture. So when Aristotle discusses what his predecessors were saying about the principle, first principle, he says that Thales said that water is the principle, first principle. But, given that we know that this is kind of Aristotle's expression and terminology, and also his question, his research project to ask what are the first principles, we should be suspicious. We kind of see a flag here and we notice, well, this is probably not what Thales was saying, because it is all phrased in Aristotle's terminology. So even though Aristotle says that according to Thales, water is the first principle, that gives you a reason to go to other sources and ask yourself, is it likely that Thales was really saying that, or maybe did he use another expression? And the other expression that we find in other sources is that Thales says that everything is out of water. Now, that is a broad and quite underdetermined formulation. It could mean kind of anything. And I want us to use this claim as a kind of thought experiment in order to see what kinds of theories, what types of theories early Greek philosophers came up with when they were asking, what is it that explains nature? And it's not just that you can give different answers to that kind of question. You can also give different types of answers. And we can just use Thales as an example in order to get clear about the types of answers that there are. Now, I'm going to present this as a kind of quiz for you with 4 options. And it's your job to decide which of the 4 options is most compelling. And I want you to decide that by looking at the sources which are the assigned reading. And just sort of think about, what do you think is the most likely reading of Thales's claim and why? So here are the 4 options. The first option is that Thales is making a claim that is temporal and about a kind of originating source. So what does that mean? That means that he would be saying that water is like the first thing that ever existed was water. And everything came out of it. It was the source of everything. It was the beginning and the source of everything. So that would be a claim that is temporal and about a kind of origin or source. The second option is that we're not at all talking about a temporal idea here, but we're talking about constituents. It could be that Thales says that water is the smallest constituent of everything. Even though the world looks like it consists of a million different things, really deep down, everything consists of water. That would be a claim about the smallest constituents of the world. So those are kind of the 2 most straightforward options. Either he makes a temporal claim about an originating source, or he makes a claim about constituents of the world. Now, there are 2 other versions, which are kind of mixed options. The third option is that he makes a claim about a temporal development, about what came first, but it's nevertheless a claim about constituents. So how would that look? That would be the idea that water was the first constituent, the first element that existed. And out of that first element, then the other elements, earth and fire and so on, came to exist. So that would be the idea that we are making a temporal claim, but it's nevertheless a claim about constituents. So it's kind of a mix of the first 2 options. And the fourth and last option that I want to present is that he's not making a temporal claim, but a claim about something contemporaneous, but nevertheless a claim about the source or origin of things. And that would be the idea that water is kind of all the time, contemporaneously with the existence of the world. Water is the kind of thing that sustains the world, that kind of feeds into everything and keeps it alive. So that is also a combination of features of the first and the second option, but it's a different combination. So the first and the second option kind of give us in total 4 options because we can combine their elements differently. And just to repeat, the first option is temporal claim about an origin and source. The second option is claim about constituents. The third option is temporal claim about constituents. The fourth option is contemporaneous claim about a sustaining source and origin. And it's your job now to come up with your own thought about what do you think is the most likely view for us to ascribe to Thales.